Great, we're going to be thinking this afternoon about this question of Jesus and whether Jesus really rose from the dead. I'd love you to take hold of this little book which has got John written on the front. This is a part of the Bible, written by a man called John, one of Jesus' closest friends, an eyewitness of Jesus. And we're going to have a look at what he says, and we're going to think about whether that really is credible in our world. Can you really believe what John says about Jesus? And I'd love you to turn to page 57 with me of these books. I want you to check what I'm saying. I don't want you just to believe it because I say it. I want you to actually check it for yourself. So have a look with me at John chapter 20 on page 57. And Jesus has been crucified. He's been nailed to a cross. The Romans knew what they were doing when they killed people. So Jesus is really properly dead, and he's put in a tomb. But look what happens where it says the resurrection at the bottom of page 57. Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, that's John, the one who wrote this gospel, and said to them, "They've taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they've laid him." So Peter went out with the other disciple, and they were going towards the tomb. Both of them were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. So there's John saying, actually, I'm faster than Peter. I beat him. For all history, everyone's going to know that I'm faster than Peter. And stooping to look in, he saw the linen cloth lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen cloths lying there, and the face cloth which had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to their homes. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb, and as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They've taken away my Lord. I do not know where they've laid him." Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not cling to me. I've not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I'm ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord," and that he'd said these things to her. So there it is. There's the claim, okay? Jesus, properly dead, 3 days later, properly alive again. Now that is a big, big claim. This is not in the realm of Jesus the nice teacher, Jesus the myth, Jesus the, oh yes, I like him, he's quite inspirational. This is historical claim. Jesus rose from the dead. One day he was dead, 3 days later he was alive again. Now you have to make a decision about that. Either that's true or it's false. That is not a matter of opinion, it's a matter of history. And therefore we have to make a decision. If Jesus really rose from the dead, then he is the most important and significant man who's ever lived. No one else has ever done that. If he didn't rise from the dead, everything he said, everything he did, doesn't matter. Do you see? Everything hangs on whether he rose from the dead or not. And I've got 3 reasons why I want to say to you that the resurrection of Jesus really matters. So let me spell it out for you, and then you're going to get a chance to write some questions down and come back at me and raise any questions that you've got, anything you want to ask, all right? The first reason that the resurrection matters is because it stands up in history. Okay, it really does stand up in history. It's historically reliable. Now I'm aware, okay, that normally dead people don't rise. I've got a degree in science. Okay, I'm pretty good at science. I'm aware that when something's dead, it normally stays dead. And the people in those days, they knew that when something was dead, it stayed dead. I don't think there were many, when the little kid's hamster died, I don't think there were many parents saying, well, let's just put it in a box for 3 days. Perhaps it will come alive again. Perhaps the fairies will put dust on it and it will all be They knew that dead people stayed dead. The people who saw Jesus crucified, they weren't expecting to see him alive again. He was dead. Dead, end, finished, gone, right? Over. And so they go to the tomb, particularly Mary, this lady we're told about. She goes to the tomb early in the morning. She's not expecting to find Jesus alive. And as she goes, we find that the stone has been rolled away. She goes to get Simon, Peter, and the other disciple, that's John. They come, they look, they see the body's gone, still don't know what's happened. At that point, several things could have happened, couldn't they? It could have been that someone had come and nicked the body. It could have been that the religious leaders, the people who were enemies of Jesus, perhaps they came and hid the body as a practical joke, or because they were worried about it. Or perhaps some of Jesus' friends had come and they'd taken the body so that they could claim that Jesus was risen. A number of things could have happened. So at that point, they're like, well, there's no body. That's all we know at the moment. But then comes the big claim that Mary actually sees him. And it's not just Mary. If we'd read on, we discovered the rest of Jesus' friends. They saw him. In fact, later on we're told 500 people saw Jesus all at once. Now, I'm aware that you could say, look, how do you know that that's really historically true? How do you know what happened? Well, here's my question for you. My question is that something big must have happened. Because in the immediate years after Jesus had claimed to rise from the dead, it would have been very easy to disprove it. Right? If someone had got the body, they would have gone, hello, here's the body. I mean, that would have killed it pretty quick, wouldn't it? You've got to remember, 500 people claimed to have seen Jesus risen from the dead. And they were still alive. You could go and talk to them and say, did you really see it? You see, it would be very difficult to get this rumour off the ground in the immediate years after Jesus' death. It would have been easy to disprove, but no one could. Lots of people wanted to. Lots of people had good reason to try and prove Jesus rose from the dead. This isn't, take the hamster story. This isn't a sort of, imagine I said to you today, oh, my hamster rose from the dead the other day. You'd go, oh, you're a bit nutty, but whatever. But you've got no real reason. I'm not like I'm claiming that this hamster therefore needs to transform your life and is the Lord of all and ruler of all, and therefore you'd have no, you're not actually going to fight me over it. But when it comes to Jesus, actually Jesus does claim to be the ruler of all. He does claim to be the king of all, and therefore people really wanted to disprove it. But no one did. And this claim that Jesus rose from the dead, it grew and grew and grew. And no one could show it didn't happen. And so when I look at my scientific training says you look at what's the facts and then you develop a theory to fit the facts the best. So I've got these facts, the fact that I know that a man called Jesus lived, I know that he was crucified, I know he was dead, I know he was put in a tomb, and I know that then he wasn't there anymore. Okay, what fits best the facts? I know what I think happened. What do you think happened? If you don't think he rose from the dead, what's your explanation? What happened to the body? See, I don't think there's any other good theory I've heard that explains why the body was gone. And here's another interesting thing that just kind of gives you a hint. I'm not saying any of these things totally prove it, but I'm saying these things give us a hint of the fact that Jesus was raised. No one ever made a big shrine at the death place of Jesus, at the burial site of Jesus. You can go to Abraham's death place, massive shrine to Abraham, the founder of Judaism. You can go to Medina. You can see the massive shrine to the Prophet Muhammad in the place where he died. You can see the huge shrine to Buddha. But there's nothing. They don't even know where it was. They don't even know which tomb it was. Why? Because people weren't interested in his grave, because he wasn't there. You see? Why is there no shrine to the grave place of Jesus? Because they weren't interested in it. Never were. And I believe passionately that if you study the facts, study the history, you will discover that the resurrection of Jesus stands up in history. But I want to move on. You can pick me up on that. We can talk some more about that. But I'm never going to convince you kind of by historical facts and blah, 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 blah. We can talk about that stuff. There's great evidence. But there's something more I want to say. And that is that the resurrection of Jesus is important, not just because it stands up in history, but because, secondly, it echoes in our hearts. Now, I want you to think about this for a second. I reckon that all of us have a longing for resurrection built into who we are. Let me explain what I mean. Why do people play the lottery, national lottery? Particularly if you've got very little money, when money's tight, why do people spend more on the lottery? Because the national lottery promises you resurrection. Because if you win the lottery, you can leave behind your old way of life and have a whole new life. Yeah? Do you see, that's the whole thing. You die to your old life and you have a whole new life. That's resurrection. Why do people stand up and sing for Simon Cowell? They all queue up. All these people who can't sing, and they stand there and they go, la, 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 can't sing, rubbish. Why? Because Simon Cowell has the power of resurrection. This is why people love these stories of, I used to stack shelves in Asda, my life was so empty and meaningless, but now I'm a global superstar. Why do we love that? Maybe you don't. But why does millions of people absolutely hooked on these stories? Why? Because we love resurrection. It's built into who we are. We love this sense of, I want something new. I want to leave behind this old. We love it. Think of all the films that are built around this theme of resurrection, this theme of someone's having their life changed from rubbish to fantastic. This is what we love. Why? Why do we like that? I remember a few years ago, the BBC ran a series of programmes called The Frozen Planet. It was brilliant. It was a nature programme. And my favourite bit was this thing about a caterpillar. There was this caterpillar called the woolly bear caterpillar. You know how caterpillars work, right? Caterpillar eats a load of stuff, makes a thing, and then becomes a thing. Yeah? My understanding is based entirely on the Hungry Caterpillar book. That's the level of my knowledge of caterpillar life cycle. Now, the woolly bear caterpillar in the Arctic, it's exactly the same. It eats and eats and eats. But in one summer, it can't eat enough stuff because everything freezes over, obviously. So it has to hide under a rock. It goes under a rock and it freezes for the winter. It literally freezes. Its blood, its gut, everything freezes. And then in the spring, it defrosts. It comes out and it eats more green stuff. But it still hasn't eaten enough. So it goes back under a rock and it freezes again. Defrosts, comes out, eats more. Still hasn't eaten enough. Right? For 14 years, it does this. 14 times it freezes and defrosts. On the 14th year, it comes out, it eats. And on the 14th year, it suddenly goes, oh, I think I've had enough. This is it. No more rocks, no more hiding. And it makes this cocoon, and it spends however long in the cocoon, and then it comes out, and it's a moth. It has 3 days, and then it's dead. I mean, it's like, it's got to find a mate, it's got to go out for dinner, it's got to do all this stuff. It's got 3 days, 14 years. And it gets 3 days, and then it's dead. And it's funny, but also quite tragic. And it's like we live our lives like this, right? We live our lives desperately seeking after something because we have this sense of resurrection. As we want this, we feel like this, there must be more to life than this. It just feels so meaningless. And we see stuff on the news and like this horrific plane crash in the Alps in the last couple of days. We see this stuff and we say, this world is so rubbish. There must be more to life, and we pursue more, and we want to get something. We don't know what it is, and we want to aim for something. We want to find this thing, but then it's gone. And this is why resurrection matters so much, because if there's a man who beat death, if there's a man who came back from death, wow, suddenly he becomes really important. Because he is the one who can satisfy that longing for resurrection that all of us actually have. Why do I long for resurrection? Because I was designed for it. Because I was built for it. Because I was created by a God who did not create me simply to suffer and die. He created me to live. And that's why I long for it. That's why our world longs for it. And that's why the story of the resurrection of Jesus matters so much, because it echoes in our hearts. It's not just a fact of history. We find an echo in our hearts that says, actually, I long for that. Actually, don't you? Look, forget whether you believe it or not. Isn't there a part of you that longs for someone who can beat death? Someone who could actually get you through death? We do long for that. So it stands up in history. It echoes in our hearts. But thirdly and finally, it also points to the future. This is why it matters. Because the resurrection of Jesus is not just a historical fact. If Jesus really did rise from the dead, that means he's alive. And the massive claim is that Jesus, the one who is alive and is risen, who has returned to heaven, the Bible says one day he's going to return and he's going to judge this world. He's going to put all things right. He is going to punish those who have lived in rebellion, and he's going to save those who have trusted him. He is going to put this world back together. And there's a part of the Bible that says this: God has set a day, a future day when he will judge. And you say, no, I don't believe it. How do I know that? Well, the Bible says you know that because he's given proof of it by rising Jesus from the dead. Do you see that? How do I know there's a future day coming when God will judge this world? Because he's already risen Jesus from the dead. And Jesus is the one who on that day will be the judge. I don't know where you think our world is heading. I don't know how you think our world is going to end. My kids got freaked out the other day because they read something that said I can't remember how many billion years it was, but let's say 3 billion years, our world is going to become whatever it is, a fireball star thing, and blow up, basically. And my kids were like, we're going to blow up. I said, 3 billion years, boys. We're going to be all right. Don't panic. I don't know what you think the end of the world's going to be. Whether you think it's just going to be some big fireball at some point when everything explodes. The Bible says, no. There is a God who made this world. There is a God who one day will judge this world. When he will put all the evil that is going on in our world, he will punish all evil. And he's given proof of it by rising Jesus from the dead. And if Jesus has got through death, if Jesus is the one who's faced death, suffered death and risen again, he's the one who can get you through death too. He's the one who can give us life that we were created for. So actually this is why resurrection matters, not because it's just a historical fact. It is history, but because it echoes in our hearts, and because it points us to the future day, and we need to be ready for that day. Because if we refuse Jesus, if we refuse to listen to him, on that day when he comes, we will look in his face and we will discover that we've lived our life as his enemy, and we will face his punishment. That is why I'm here, because I want to warn you. I want to tell you the resurrection of Jesus means that you are in great danger if you ignore him and refuse him.
But Why did Jesus appear to Mary Magdalene first and not somebody else?
I think because he chose to. I think it's interesting. I think if you were trying to make up a story about the resurrection of Jesus, you probably wouldn't choose. In this culture, I'm not being rude, but in this culture, a woman's testimony in court wouldn't have stood. They were not considered to be reliable witnesses. And yet actually, Jesus appears first to a woman. And I think if you were making up, these are the sort of things that give it they don't prove anything, but they give it a ring of truth. You were making this up, you'd want to have someone really important, and probably a man, as your first witness to the resurrection. And yet here it's Mary. Because that's how Jesus did it. Do you see it? Yeah. I don't think there's any particular significance in it being this particular person. I think it's a massive privilege that Jesus gives her.
Okay, our next question. Mary didn't recognise Jesus. This person's looked over at John 21 and it says, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realise that it was Jesus. Could it have been another person?
Okay, I want you to imagine that you're friends with Colin, who is a caterpillar. Right? And you're chatting to Colin. It's great to see you, Colin. Nice, great, well, yeah, great to see you. You go away for a couple of weeks on a holiday, you come back, and a butterfly flies into your face and says, "Hi, I'm Colin." You go, "No, you're not Colin. Colin doesn't have wings. You are not Colin." "No, I am Colin." Right? I want you to imagine you're friends with a seed. You got odd friends. Sally, the seed. And there she is, just a little seed. "Sally, nice to see you. How you doing? You go on holiday for a few weeks. There's this massive sunflower. Hi, I'm Sally." "No, you're not Sally. Sally's little." The point I'm making is that the resurrection of Jesus, those are the pictures that are used to explain the resurrection of Jesus. So it's like this. Jesus' body, in fact, Jesus even uses this. In John 12, this is exactly the picture Jesus uses. A seed is put into the ground, dies, and then rises. That's the image Jesus uses. And so Jesus' body, it was the same body, and yet in the resurrection it was transformed. Because it was never going, so Jesus had a body just like mine. It was dying, it was weak, it got tired, he got hungry, he got thirsty. It was a real human body in all its brokenness. But then Jesus died and was put into the grave. When he rose, it was his same body, and yet it was a new body because he was risen. And so, yeah, I think people didn't recognize him immediately because there was a difference, and yet you could still tell it was Jesus, and so people did still know it was Jesus. All right? So there was a slight difference. Did you want to?
Just say, so it wasn't a completely new body, it still recognised.
Yeah.
Because he still had the holes.
Yeah, absolutely. So just like Colin, the caterpillar, or Sally the seed, it's still Sally, and it's still her. So she could talk about time, well, when I was a seed, it's that, and that's the pattern with Jesus. So absolutely, that's really helpful. So Jesus was able to say, "Look, I've got holes in my hands. Come put your fingers in my holes." So it was definitely the same Jesus, but they didn't recognise him because he was sort of brand new too.
We've got 3 questions that are kind of very similar.
Okay.
They're along the lines of, how do we know that Jesus can or will save us, and how does that happen?
Yeah.
So how does he kind of satisfy that longing for resurrection, or, will do that?
Yeah, okay. Okay, I'm going to say something that might blow your mind slightly. Let's go for it. Okay. The picture is that Jesus, the idea the Bible gives, is that Jesus is what's called the first fruit. His resurrection is the first fruit. Now, if you were an apple farmer, right, and you've got an apple tree, you're excited when the first apple comes, because what does it tell you is coming? Loads more apples. You'd be weird, wouldn't you, if you saw the first apple and you went, oh, terrific, I've got loads of oranges coming. The first apple tells you what's coming. When it talks about Jesus being raised from the dead as the first fruit, that tells you that there's a load more who are coming who are also going to be raised from the dead. So, I remember seeing this very, very powerfully. I remember watching my granny die. Okay, and she was trusting Jesus. She was a Christian. And she died of cancer, and her whole body just withered away. And I cared for her, and I did a lot of caring for her as she died. And the extraordinary thing was that my great hope for my granny is that kind of seed body, that caterpillar body, which has now been buried in the ground, that actually the hope is, my confident hope, is that she'll be raised to new life. You say, that's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. Yes, it would be if I hadn't already seen it happen. Because that's what happened to Jesus. And it's as if you take hold of Jesus, if you hold Jesus by the hand, it's as if you kind of, as Jesus goes through death to life, it's Jesus takes you through death to life. That's the hope. So one day this body that you see here, this almost fine example of a body, one day this body is going to die. Because this is just a seed. But as it dies, it will too be raised to new life. And this is, so death is in our world. Oh, don't worry, ask me. That's that. Does anyone want to come back on it? Does that make any sense at all? It's all about that idea of being united to Jesus, and actually what, through Jesus, we have that hope too.
Would it be right to assume then that the resurrection body would be somewhat like Jesus, or would he still be representing us, looking like us but not us?
I think it'll be the same. I think it will be like, I think so. I know it's really difficult to kind of think about this. What we tend to do is people have this view of the future and heaven, which is all sort of, I'm going to float around in a floaty spirit thing. I don't know if you've seen the film What Dreams Will Come. You probably haven't, you're all too young. What Dreams Will Come, Robin Williams. It's this really naff view of heaven. I don't want to go to heaven, if that's what it is. But if Jesus becomes my picture, then Jesus dies and is raised to new life. Then my hope is that I will die and then be raised when he returns to judge the world. I'll be raised to new life. My body will be transformed. It will still be my body. So I'll be able to say when I was a seed, but it will be gloriously new. And in fact, I'm sorry, this is probably way, way beyond what I should be doing. But anyway, in fact, the Bible says that that's not just going to happen to my body, it's also going to happen to this world. That this world is going to go through a resurrection. Right? So because of Jesus, because Jesus is the first fruit, this world which is so broken and painful and full of hurt and crying and pain, actually the Bible says this world is going to die and be reborn as a new creation. It's the same world but new. Caterpillar, butterfly. Right? And all of that sounds like complete, total nonsense, except that I've seen it happen. So I know it happens because Jesus raised. Do you see why this matters so much? It really is big stuff.
Okay. Last question.
Oh, good.
It says, excuse this really silly question. It's not a silly question. But has no one ever found Jesus' body? I presume people have tried to find it.
Yeah, no one's ever found Jesus' body. In fact, let me finish with this, right? There was a guy called Frank Morrison, very clever lawyer, who really wanted to disprove that Jesus rose from the dead. He just said, I just want to prove it once and for all that it never happened. And he set out to write a book about it. He went to the Holy Land, he went to the place where it happened, he went to research it, he did all the work on it. And the first chapter of his book, the book is called Who Moved the Stone. The first chapter of his book is called The Book That Refused to Be Written. And in the first chapter of his book, he says, I set out to write a book to prove Jesus didn't rise. And now I'm utterly convinced that he did. Now that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, actually, if you take the time to seriously look at the evidence, there is stacks of evidence. Now, I know there are lots of people who've looked at the evidence and have come to different conclusions, all right? But I'm saying it's not a stupid historical view to say Jesus rose. And I think if someone had managed to find the body of Jesus, I mean, today, that would be impossible, right? There's no way of proving it. I mean, they found King Richard III buried under a car park in Leicester, and they seem fairly sure it's him. Sort of. But that was only 400 years ago. We're talking 2000. There's no way that anyone could conclusively find or not find the body. But like 20 years after, you could have had a good stab at it, surely. And you could bet your life there's a lot of people looking for it.